Hello there, it's John Florescu. I am in Bucharest, and today I'm welcoming a name that you're all familiar with, Mark Gitenstein, who, as everybody knows, was ambassador to Romania, and very select people know also that he was ambassador to the EU afterwards. He took the post in 2021 to Brussels, and he was here from 2009 to 2012, if I got my facts right. His grandfather was from Botoșani in Romania and had links also to Chișinău, and he went to university at Duke University and Georgetown Law School. He served as special counsel on two Senate committees. I believe one was the Senate Judiciary Committee, as well as on the Senate Committee on Intelligence. So he covers a broad spectrum of subjects, so it makes our 50 minutes a rich 50 minutes. And also he's a politician, I guess you'd say political person, because anybody operating at that level would certainly be that. I want to begin with the not easy question, but a timely question, Israel. Do you think in the United States that people are thinking, glad somebody had the guts to do this, or this is just more warmongering?
Well, first of all, John, thanks for having me. And I think this conversation series is wonderful. I know Jim Rosapep was on the line with me, but when we founded Alianta, this is exactly the kind of thing we had in mind, and very pleased to be part of it. To your question, I think probably most Americans are sympathetic to what the Israelis are trying to do. I think to the extent they are trying to disarm or defang the nuclear capability of Iran, you know, every U.S. administration, all the way back to the Obama administration, has been trying to do the same thing. The Israelis got impatient and clearly had intelligence that things were close to fruition in terms of building a nuclear weapon, and they were concerned about it. They had a right to be, and they had a right to defend themselves. I think when you get into issues like regime change and further ambitions, I think there'll probably be some questions about that in the United States. And I think they're sympathetic to what President Trump has been saying, is that he would like to see a peaceful resolution of the issue, especially on the nuclear question. Quite frankly, I believe that if Trump had not dismantled that agreement, in his first term, we might not be where we are now. There are a lot of things could have been different, but it is what it is, and I think they're both on a legitimate track, both Trump and Israel. I think a settlement of the situation both in Gaza and in the region is critical, and the war not expand into a general war in the Middle East is extremely important, which is clearly what the Biden administration was trying to do as well.
Well, I think you kind of hit it pretty well on the head. It's an ongoing issue. You know, we'll see which way it's turned. I can turn to a little more uplifting subject, which is the meaning of Dan Nicușor's victory. What do you make of it?
Well, you and I talked about this yesterday. I think if you look, the only time the Romanian people can really express themselves as a nation is when they vote for president, because every other election is usually regional, or it's municipal, or it's you vote in your local Judette or whatever. When you vote for president, everybody votes. Everybody in the diaspora votes. One or a choice, two or three candidates to choose from, and they make their choice. If you go back to the last three elections that I know a little bit about, the Băsescu election in 2009, the Iohannis election in 2014, and this election, in every case, the result is essentially the same. When Romanians are asked where they want to go, they generally say they like the pro-Western direction, the pro-EU direction, the pro-NATO direction. And the gratifying thing about the Nicușor-Dan election is, notwithstanding a deliberate effort by the Russians to manipulate that election and send it in a more pro-Russian direction or a less Western direction, failed again. And I think that's good. And it was not simply a close election. It was a definitive election, 65% turnout, which is one of the highest turnouts certainly that I ever experienced, going back into the 90s. So a lot of people voted, and the result was decisive. It was a 6-8 vote margin for Nicolae, who ran a campaign based on those Western principles. And I think that is a good result in my mind. That's what Alianta is all about, preserving that kind of alliance, that kind of
a decisive victory, a strong victory, and a building victory, when a building margin when sensed in the final week, right up to the vote. You mentioned Trump there, President Trump there, and it was a bit hard to read what the attitude of the administration was. You had J.D. Vance saying things, Elon Musk saying things, them making comments about Russian interference. What do you make of the U.S. view on that, or the White House view?
It was murky, I think would be the kind way of saying it. I was very disturbed by J.D. Vance's speech. I know a lot of Romanians were, a lot of pro-American Romanians were upset by it. On the other hand, Trump himself never endorsed a candidate. And indeed, when Nicolae was elected, he called him up and congratulated him. But more importantly, when he announced his new nominee for ambassador, U.S. ambassador to Romania, he had a very positive statement about the importance, the strategic importance of Romania, and the extent to which he wanted to build that relationship along the lines that every administration in the last 20 years has wanted to. And that sort of continuity is extremely important and reassuring.
To some extent, you regard Daniel Kishore as a bit of an outsider, when you look at the traditional politicians. And to some extent, Simeon, of course, was an outsider. And then it seemed like competition a little bit between two outliers.
Well, it was. If you want to know what this election was really about, aside from reaffirming the Western direction, the pro-EU, pro-NATO direction, it was a change election, okay? People generally want that direction, but they want it to be more effective. They're impatient with the existing political parties, I think, rightfully so. There's a really revealing piece that came out while I was still ambassador in Brussels in Politico. It's sort of 7 reasons why Romanians hate their government. And if you read the data on it, that it shows on what's happening in education, healthcare, and transparency, in regulatory schemes that are designed to help investment and industrial production and foreign investment, Romanians are frustrated by it. And they're frustrated, I think, primarily by the existing parties. And that's why they were all rejected in this election. And I think the task that Nicolae has is to build on reform in all of those areas. And he has to bring along the existing parties. And, I think the existing parties have got to confront the fact that their approach has not worked largely. Right. And people are unhappy about it. And fighting over who gets this position or that position and how their networks survive is wrong. It's a mistake. And I think that's what's making this negotiation so difficult, but so profound.
Do you think the public, the international diplomatic world has forgiven Romania in a sense for canceling an election? Do you think that's water under the bridge?
Pretty much, yeah. I think people that were instinctively critical of that were right and wrong. They were right. It's never good to cancel an election, although elections have been canceled. And when you have a candidate who admits that he took no campaign contributions and expended no campaign funds, therefore he basically said, I violated the campaign laws of my country. The court system had to do something, and they did. They were sort of, I must say, in fairness, a little clumsy about it. But the fact was, it was a fair election, the one that was run. Simeon had every opportunity he wanted. There was a free press operating. People got to make a choice, and they made a choice. And I think most people who care about Romania understand that. There are a lot of people who don't care about Romania or think they understand Romania and are very patronizing towards Romanians who don't understand that, are not happy with it. But quite frankly, they are not the predominant view, both in Brussels and in Washington.
I mean, the thing that everybody's talking about now is who's going to be the prime minister, who's getting close to the onion. You can imagine what what's going on now. But if you were giving advice to the new president, give me 2 or 3 ideas you'd put square in the center or initiatives.
Look, under the Romanian constitution, the parliament is the most powerful institution, more powerful than the presidency in many respects. And in the end, the parliament has to implement the reforms that are necessary. So Gitenstein needs to choose, and the parliament needs to confirm someone who can make that happen. Okay, I actually think we're better off with someone from the parliament who knows how that place operates, has experience in governance, has political skills, and is loyal to that agenda of reform. Without getting into names, I think that is the most important test for a prime minister.
Do you interpret the victory, that victory just a couple of weeks ago, 3 weeks ago, as a slowing down of the drift toward the right in a way? Because you saw it in Italy, you saw it in Austria and Slovakia. It kind of sent a big message, didn't it?
Well, I think that's a little too simplistic. When people say the right, I think a lot of people who voted for Georgescu and for Simeon in the first round were people that were unhappy with the direction of the country. The so-called right direction, wrong direction polls. People were not happy with the direction Romania was going, and they wanted a change. A lot of those people clearly went from Simeon to Gitenstein because they saw in Gitenstein someone who was pro-Western but pro-change. And the problem with Simeon is he was not pro-Western and he was pro-change, although the change was not clear as to what it meant. If by that you mean was Russian-oriented and was nationalistic and chauvinistic, people didn't like that in Romania. On the other hand, if they wanted to shake things up, I could see why they would choose Simeon, but they all of a sudden realized Gitenstein was a better choice, and he was. That's why we endorsed him. Yeah.
See, you all together with 6 other ambassadors wrote a letter that got a lot of exposure here. You were talking about the importance of free media, free press, and so on. And it got out there very widely. And all of you, I think, you as well, Jim, were doing media all across Romania. I have a feeling it had a big impact. What did you think?
Well, I'm 4,000, 5,000 miles away. I have to take your word for it. I think it did have everybody tells me it had a big impact. I can tell you it was posted on G4 Media as soon as we released it. And I was told by them that they had 150,000 unique visitors to the letter within the first 2 hours. Well, that's a lot of people. And so it clearly, people were interested in it. Whether it affected their votes, I hope it did, but I have no way of knowing that. Everybody tells me it did. I think the importance of the letter was really twofold. One, not because of the murkiness, especially the MAGA folks, but to a certain extent, the Trump administration wasn't clear where America was. We wanted to send a message as 7 Americans who had each of us spent 2 or 3 years, if not more, living in Romania, caring about Romania, devoted to the alliance between the United States and Romania, and reassuring Romanians, look, people who will understand you and understand this country and care about it, this is what the values we think you should stand for. This is the candidate that we think best embraces those values. And we wanted to reassure Romanians, and I think to that extent, it worked. It also was designed to frame the issue in the way we see it, which is a determined assault by anti-Western institutions, in particular the Russian intelligence services and Russia itself, through TikTok and other social media platforms, that we wanted to counter that. And I think that's traditional U.S. position. There's nothing really new in it. I think, although it was a little extraordinary for us to endorse a candidate, we in a sense had no choice.
Right. Yeah, it was. I noticed that the diaspora tended to favor a little bit more Simeon than what you saw domestically. And a lot
Yeah.
of people in Romania was saying, given the size of the diaspora, well, they really shouldn't have the right to vote, or their vote should be canceled after 5 years living overseas, or they don't not paying taxes here anymore. There's a lot of chatter in that direction. What do you make of that sentiment?
Listen, when Basescu won the diaspora vote, the Pesade people said the same thing. The same, and the same thing was true with Johannes when Johannes won the diaspora vote. The critics. I think it's your law that diaspora can vote. They should continue to vote. I think it's a positive force. I think a lot of the diaspora people who were unhappy, first of all, they were deluged with social media.
Yeah.
We know that some of that was manipulated by the Russians, but I think less a factor, more they were change voters. They wanted to see a change too. If you sort of dug beneath them a little bit and found out why, it's because they were unhappy with the current establishment
Yeah.
in Romania, and the current establishment had better take that lesson. They need
I,
to listen to
I
this.
my guess that's the first lesson to take on board. Take away
Yeah.
Siemens' arguments to some extent in terms of unfairness or being kind of, you know,
By the way, I have a very dear friend on the left in the United States. I won't say his name, who used to come to me when I was ambassador and lecture me on this candidate or that candidate. And I would say, his name was John. I would say, John, let me explain to you one thing you need to understand about Romanian politics. It is not ideological, it's tribal.
that's exactly right.
And, tribal politics has got to stop in Romania. It's just doesn't accomplish anything. People get good jobs. They spend a lot of money in the right and wrong places to take care of their friends, but it doesn't change anything. And Romania needs change. They need to do what I hope Nikish Dan and his prime minister will do, and the new
Usually,
government.
if you ask most Romanians, what's the difference between acronyms, PNL, UCR, and so forth, they can't quite get it straight, because people shift left and right all the time. I mean, there's some obvious differences, but I take on board your comment. I'm asking you to put your hat as ambassador to Brussels on, and now, let's say more than 100 days, well over 100 days that the Trump administration has taken over. Do you think the U.S. policy towards Europe is clear in the European mind among those people you are dealing with all the time?
I want to do that, but I want to go back to one point I wanted
Okay.
to make about the letter that I didn't get to say. And I want to, notwithstanding, we talked about Trump, but I want to underline the role that Adrian Zuckerman played in all of this. He's the last Trump ambassador to Romania. He's Romanian, like me. I mean, he has much deeper Romanian roots than I do, speaks fluent Romanian, and cares a lot about it. He understands the country in a way that I don't think anybody in the Trump administration does, which is unfortunate. And he played a very big role in getting this letter done and creating a sense of solidarity between people in the United States and Romania. So I just want to repeat that. Now, going back to EU, look, I'll never forget the day that Harris lost. I was very close to Ursula von der Leyen and her staff, and I remember calling Bjorn Siebert, who was the chief of staff, a brilliant guy. I said, Bjorn, we've created a lot of problems for you in losing this election. I said, it's a different world you're going to inherit. And I said, look, I'm not an expert on Donald Trump, but my prediction is Ukraine will be an issue and Russia will be an issue, but the biggest issue is going to be trade. And it's turned out to be the case. And Bjorn and Ursula von der Leyen's staff are extremely talented, and will find a common position with Trump, because I think they actually agree with some of the points that Trump has made about trying to reach a common approach between the EU and the United States in terms of in terms of trade. Now, 2 points I would make on trade, and this is more aspirational on my part, and I've actually said this in op-eds. I hope that this discussion will be about trade-related issues and not non-tariff barriers, and in particular, digital regulation. I think there are some in the Trump orbit who want to see the trade issue turned into a big fight over the Digital Services Act and regulation of social media. If we learned anything from the experience in Romania, it's that the Digital Services Act and the interim effect of that act on manipulation of social media, like TikTok, is critical, and an effort to use the trade arguments as a way to dismantle the Digital Services Act as somehow a violation of Europeans' free speech rights, or certainly American free speech rights, is a mistake. And I hope that that won't happen. I actually don't think it will happen. I think the fight will be over many of the issues that we were struggling with, like not only the global minimum tax, but also the steel, the global steel arrangements, the airplane, the Boeing Airbus controversy, a number of trade barriers that were set up, more tariff inequities, especially in the ag space, that have to be dealt with. And we tried to deal with them. We were very distracted by the war, I must admit that. The war used up a tremendous amount of political capital as we tried to build energy independence for Romania, for Europe, and also sanctions and export controls. Those things used up a lot of our time, and we've spent less time on trade. Trump clearly doesn't want to do that and wants to put the focus on trade, and I think that's a healthy thing. I think one basic lesson that Donald Trump will learn is don't underestimate Ursula von der Leyen. She is one of the great talents in the world right now. She knows how to manage this 27-nation albatross, which is the European Union. She does a very good job of it. She will reach consensus. No one else can do this. The famous line that Henry Kissinger has, like, who do I call?
Yeah. She's the one. That was one of my questions. So you just answered.
Yeah, she is the person you call. And if you can't reach her, you call Bjorn. Okay. There is no alternative to the European Union. And the thing that I think, I told this to von der Leyen and her staff when I was leaving, I said, look, I think the place where you will reach consensus on some of these granular trade issues, but more importantly, an approach to the People's Republic of China. And you'll learn what we learned, which is if you're going to take on China, and we wanted to take on China as well in terms of its non-market activity, it's better to have 40% of the GDP of the world united than only 10 or 15%. And the only way to do that is through the European Union, because the two largest free market systems in the world, Europe and the United States, you manage 50 member states in the United States to the President of the United States. And in the end, all of the system is much less centralized in Europe. You do that through the President of the European Commission and the Council and the Parliament. And you have to learn to work that system. It's frustrating. By the way, you don't think people are frustrated with the United States when they come and look at it? It's the same problem. And it's a reality. You have to deal with it. And I think in the end, Trump and von der Leyen will settle this. It cannot be done through individual member states, as you know. Just because you have Germany and France and Italy, it helps a lot, but it doesn't help Romania. It doesn't help. You don't think Romania and Poland and the Baltic states, the Benelux countries, have their own opinions about this? Yeah. And they do, and they will exercise them. And each one of them has a veto in the European Council.
You mentioned the thing about the fogginess of the Trump administration. I guess one could ask, there's Donald Trump there, and who else is weighing in heavily, in your opinion? You have private individuals, you have officials, you have a whole array of consuls. What's your view on that?
That's something you need to ask Adrian. I don't know how that system works. I think the Secretary of State plays a significant role. He's also now the acting national security advisor. He's a very talented guy.
Mhm.
The extent to which he's an independent actor is not clear to me. But that was true in the Biden administration too. I mean, the preeminent foreign policy person in the Biden administration was Tony Blinken, but Jake Sullivan had a lot to say as well. And Biden was very good about listening to different points of view. I think Trump has got his own opinion and is much more makes up his own mind. I always found it incredibly naive in Romania that people were, and I will not get into names, but you know who they are, would claim that they could bring Donald Trump around on visa waiver or this or that. And I thought to myself, I don't know a lot about Donald Trump, but nobody has Donald Trump in their pocket. You can be sure of that. And I think that's part of the problem is that Trump himself has his own very strong views of this. And actually on Romania, he doesn't have a deep education on Romania. The difference between him and Biden had been to Romania 4 or 5 times. He had actually lived it. And long before I was there, he was there. He had been there 2 or 3 times before I came to Romania.
He knew everybody's by first name too, many of the leaders.
Yeah, he did. He did, yes. I learned that the hard way. Yeah.
Let me ask you this. You mentioned you paid high tribute to the president of the EU. Who leads Europe in let's say in country terms? Is it Britain? Is it Germany? Is it France? Is it all three? What do you make of that?
Well, Britain is no longer a member of the EU, so
yeah,
you know, I think the 3 most powerful countries, but just because the sheer size, would be Germany, France, and Italy.
yeah.
But listen, Romania and Poland are major players. They come in, I think, 4th and 5th in that list. And they are not only important economically, they're important militarily. Both Poland and Romania, on the northern flank, it's Poland, and the southeastern flank, it's Romania. I mean, what was at stake in the Romanian elections was not simply the EU, it was NATO. I mean, there are 10,000 NATO troops right now at MK Air Base in Constanza. You have the missiles in Devaselu. There was talk, there probably still is talk about putting another 10,000 NATO troops in Chinku. It's a big player in NATO. Romania is, and Poland is spending more on defense as a percentage of GDP, I think, than even the United States.
4.5 or something. Yeah.
Yeah, it's very, very high, and they're very committed to supporting the NATO alliance against Russia.
So you see no backing off from taking the import of what you're saying, a U.S. backing off of NATO support.
Well, no, I think that's a story yet to be told. I don't know if there is a. I think if there's a serious incursion by the Russians, what happens under Article 5? That's a unanimous vote. It's a very hard thing to manage. I thought that a very dangerous moment, although I understand and actually support what the Ukrainians did when they sent those missiles at, a third of the strategic bomber force of Russia. If we had gotten to a serious NATO challenge to NATO during that period by the Russian response, I was nervous about it. And I don't know what would happen in that circumstance. I think U.S. leadership in NATO, my friend Julie Smith, who was U.S. ambassador to NATO, and I spent many hours on the phone talking about these issues. And I know how difficult it is to manage NATO, and it takes strong leadership from the United States. It's just not clear to me what's going on there. And I'm not an expert on NATO. I mean, you should be asking Julie Smith these questions, Ivo Dalder. You should try and get the new ambassador on the phone if you can.
Well, and he's a mystery figure as far as I can tell. Anybody, I've been sort of sending emails around. But you mentioned Article 5, and Richard Haas said in an interview that only 1% of Americans know what Article 5 is. What do you make? I think that's actually probably true, no?
1% know what Article 5 is, maybe 5% know what NATO is. 0.2% know what the European Union is. By the way, just as a fact, it was not created to discriminate against the United States. Just I want to say that on this program, like some people say, it was not created for that purpose. It was the purpose of the European Union. With the reason the European Union was created was every war that has been fought in Europe in the last 100 years has been between Germany and France. The purpose of the European Union was to get both countries in the same organization, integrated from an economic point of view, so we could stop the wars in Europe. It is, until the Ukraine situation, it's pretty much succeeded, but that's because they have become economically integrated. Now, do we pay a price sometimes for their trade policies? Absolutely, and we should respond to that, and they should accommodate us. But that's not the purpose of the European Union. I think most Americans, if you had asked them what the European Union was, they probably thought it was a trade union or an art coalition, or they don't know what it is.
Right. Well, I guess they can be forgiven. They don't even know. Many don't even know where Ukraine is. I think they have a better idea where. Do you think the Europeans can pull together sufficient military equipment guarantees to keep Zelensky's battle viable and continuing?
Also yet to be determined. They have to try. They have no choice but to do this. I think Trump is right to say they need to step up, and they are beginning to step up in all sorts of ways. And I think the military-industrial complex, defense base in Europe is atrophied in large measure because we have provided the umbrella for them, and that needs to change, and that will change. By the way, I think Romania will benefit from that. Because Romania has a history, as does Ukraine, of building military equipment, and they could rebuild that industrial base. And I think that would be good for both countries from a security and an economic point of view.
Kissinger said, you were quoting Kissinger a moment ago, he said that usually history shows that if the principals are not at the table negotiating a peace or solution, then it usually doesn't work out. And I guess implying that it should be Zelensky and Putin and less everybody else. What do you make of that comment?
Well, I think it has to be Zelensky and Putin, the EU, the United States. They all have to be involved. And the reason the EU needs to be involved, and not simply, first of all, people don't understand this. The military equipment that was getting to Ukraine was, to a substantial sense, American military equipment, which, by the way, benefited a lot of Americans because we were building the equipment all over the United States, and it was helping our economic recovery. But it was also member states of the European Union. 27 member states were supplying some sort of military equipment. That was actually being done through the EU in cooperation with the European Command, not NATO. And the extent to which that military equipment was being sized and allocated and managed by our Secretary of Defense and the military, the various agencies within the 27 member states that manage military equipment, that was being coordinated by the EU, by the European Command. I mean, the U.S. military commanders were very much involved in that decision, but it wasn't formally NATO. So having the EU involved, it's not simply a matter of getting equipment, but getting resources to Ukraine. And the other thing to remember is the biggest chunk of resource was actually the sovereign assets, which actually sit in banks in Belgium. So it's not, they have to be involved in this too. It's what, $300 billion. This is a substantial amount of money. We found a clever way of accessing those assets by not giving them up, by not seizing those assets. But they need to be players in this as well.
Are the European countries, I mean, if you live in Portugal, you don't fear too much Putin. If you live in Poland, it's a whole different ball game. Is there, in a sense, two European attitudes? Those people in the Baltics on the front line, so to speak, that have a lot at stake, and everybody else, or at least far Western Europe. When you
Sure, although that's a lot of countries that are right on the,
yeah,
all the Baltics are on there, Poland, Hungary, actually, but certainly the Western Balkans and Romania. That's a lot of countries. That's almost half of the European Union member states. The Germans, in particular, have big investment interest in this. So,
well,
if you're in Ireland, if you're in Portugal, you're less interested. If you're in
yeah.
Malta, maybe. But the total size of the GDP and the population that are engaged in this issue, it's at least half of the European Union.
Excuse me, I'm not hearing Mark's voice well. Do you? Is Raluca? Are you okay? Are you hearing everything well?
Mark, maybe you can come closer to the microphone. Yes,
How does that sound? Better?
a little bit better.
Yeah, okay, I'm sorry.
So you haven't heard anything of a pullback because that's what from Devaselu or Black Sea or anything. There hasn't been any pullback by U.S. presence in Romania that would cause you to feel a little uneasy.
I would have felt very uneasy if Simeon had won.
Yeah.
I think that would have been a real risk on that regard. And from a security point of view, that was a big factor. But I don't see that now. I don't see that happening.
Another parlor game in Bucharest, it seems to be that which West European country has most influence on the new administration here in Romania. And obviously the French seem to have a bigger say in as much as the president was educated in France and he has a strong Francophile type of thing. Do you think France would be the more influential country in the way that Germany is to the Baltic countries or to the north?
Hard for me to assess.
Yeah.
I think they have a lot of influence. But Nicholas Dan doesn't seem to me to be the kind of guy that is overwhelmed by any foreign leader. He seems to be his own man. He's a mathematician. I think that's one thing you need to understand. Somebody pointed this out to me. He's very careful and he thinks through things, in a very sort of logical way, as any mathematician would. And I think that's healthy. And I think people are frustrated by this negotiation that's going on now, but you can be sure he's thought through all the angles. And hopefully it'll get to the right result. A lot of that depends on the establishment parties, which have to stop being tribal and start thinking about primarily what's best for Romania than what's best for their networks, if you know what I mean.
What do you make of what happened in Poland just recently with the election there?
I quite frankly was surprised that the Tusk candidate failed. I thought he was going to win. I think it shows you that that the right-wing forces in Poland have tremendous influence. I don't know what role media played in that or what role social media played. The irony is that in the parliamentary elections, a year or so earlier, Tusk won rather decisively. So I don't know what to make of what happened in Poland. I think I was disturbed by it, quite frankly.
In your years in Brussels, you obviously met with many different leaders and over the course of your life. Can you think of any foreign leader that gave you some really incisive, useful advice about the way the U.S. ought to conduct itself, or something that sort of sat in your mind for a while?
Well, as I said, I was very impressed with Ursula von der Leyen.
Yep.
She was, I'll tell you what her real value, she was very, very good in terms of, I was in a lot of conversations between her and President Biden. And Biden always listened very carefully to what she said. And she was very honest with Biden. I mean, we had long arguments about the Inflation Reduction Act and the way Europe responded to the Buy America provisions. And they both had an honest colloquy about it. And it was fascinating to watch because Biden was determined to, on the one hand, rebuild green tech in the United States and do it in a way that benefited workers. And I think what the insight that von der Leyen brought to this was, look, I agree with some of that. Indeed, we need to do some of that in Europe. But you need to understand how this complicates politics in Europe when you do things like this, whether it's AUKUS or the Inflation Reduction Act, when Europeans feel that they were not taken seriously. And I think she was very straightforward with Biden about that, and Biden heard her. It didn't change his position on the Inflation Reduction Act and the EVs, the electric vehicles and their taxes, et cetera, tax credits. But I just liked that candor on her part. And she helped me understand what I would not necessarily have otherwise understood is the sensitivity that Europeans had towards being treated fairly by Americans.
You mentioned Joe Biden there. I guess it's only normal to say, how's he doing? Do you know anything more about his health? You're a longtime friend of his.
Well, I've actually spent more time with him in the last 2 months than I did the whole 4 years when he was president. He's very much involved in writing his memoirs, very energized by it. And he wants to tell his story, which I think he should do. I think that's what's keeping him busy. I've had 2 long lunch and a dinner with him, each of them 2 or 3 hours. I came away feeling good about him personally and in terms of his state of mind. I'm worried about the most recent diagnosis. We didn't actually talk much about it. He's pretty private when it comes to those sorts of things. But like, he's a friend, and I look forward to having many years together with him. I'm down here in Rehoboth now in Delaware. I helped him choose this house. It's not more than 6 blocks from here. He's not here right now, but I intend to spend a lot of time with him. So.
Well, that's a big plus, particularly if you're going through hard times, and also particularly when you see how his legacy has been kind of under attack from all sides, and I think unfairly, and probably hopefully it doesn't distract him too much from his work. But where do you think the Democratic Party is today?
Well, and this is true whenever you lose the White House and you don't have the bully pulpit of the White House to not only rally the rest of America, but rally the Democratic Party. There is no clear-cut leader of the Democratic Party right now because we are out of power. I think if we take the House or the Senate, I think it's more likely we take the House back in the next midterm elections. That'll change. And I think 2 things will happen. One, Hakeem Jeffries, who will become speaker, is a very impressive, articulate, savvy guy. He'll become a major leader in the party. He already is a major leader, but he will have a bigger platform. And I think the presidential race will begin, and we'll begin to see some powerful new voices. And our primary system tends to select the best and the brightest. And someone will emerge from that. We just have to be patient. And in the meantime, I think the Republicans are making a lot of mistakes. I think this big, beautiful bill is a huge mistake in many respects. Cutting Medicaid in favor of tax cuts for rich people is a very stupid political decision, and they will pay a price for that. You know, I grew up in a small town in Alabama. My father built a hospital for my small town. Was 3,000 people. The nearest hospital in Florella to my hometown is 20 miles away. That hospital closed. The reason it closed is because of Medicaid. Medicaid funding was blocked by the Alabama state legislature. There was no money for Medicaid. Now there's almost 100 rural hospitals around the United States that have closed. There are 70 million Americans on Medicaid. Rural hospitals close, and the beneficiaries of rural hospitals tend to be white MAGA voters. Okay. When that hits them, they're going to say, wait a second, we didn't vote for this. Okay. And, look, here's the practical impact in my hometown of Florala. When my dad's hospital was operating, if you had a heart attack, you went to the emergency room, they saved your life. Now, if you're lucky, you get in an ambulance and drive 20 miles. That's a half an hour to the nearest hospital. The consequences, you'll die. When that is confronted, that is not a good choice, political choice. It's not only a bad political choice, it's a bad policy choice.
That's absolutely horrifying. And I think you're correct about there'll be a price to be paid for something like this. I want to get you to reflect back a little bit on your life as an ambassador in 2 different locations. You have 3 different hats. What's more fun, the big picture in Brussels, or the happy family, or I'd say the family of Bucharest?
Well, they're very different. I love both of them. My heart was clearly in Romania, remained in Romania. That's why I got so involved in this last election. That's why I got so involved with Jim and you and others on Alianta, because I cared deeply about Romania. The job in Brussels was much more stressful. Every morning I would get up after the war started and watch CNN. CNN, as you know, in Europe is very different than it is in the United States. And the coverage of the war was very graphic. And I would get up every morning and say, what can I do about this to stop this war? And so I'd go to the office and work till 10 o'clock at night in secure video calls, working on export controls and sanctions and money and weapons and getting refugees out. And, you had a lot riding on your shoulders in getting that done. And so I don't miss the stress. The work was very interesting, and I think we got a lot done. Romania is a heartfelt engagement for me, and I haven't been back to Brussels or Bucharest for a while. I'm more likely to go back to Bucharest before I go back to Brussels, because although I have good friends there, my heart is still in Romania.
You wrote a book when you were a younger man. I forget the name, the title of the book, but I had it here. It won some sort of award, a nonfiction book, Matters of Principle. Do you still have the energy and with the interest in writing your memoirs or contributing in that sense, just like your friend Joe down the street?
I've had a lot of people approach me to do this. Winston Churchill used to say this about writing a book. He would say, first it's a mistress, then it's a master, then it's a monster. All I remember about writing that book was the monster stage. It's like getting it done.
We won't be expecting to get another book.
A lot of people have told me I should do it. I think I'll be surprised if I do it. I don't think I will. Well, I have a lot I'd like to say. I think I'd rather do it in small chunks by lectures and op-eds and things like that. Maybe I'll pull them all together someday. I doubt it.
Well, I think you still have a lot to give, and it's been a joy having you here for this short hour. And I want to thank you very much, Mark, not just for this, but particularly for having started Alianta and making it such a successful and energetic organization.
Well, thank you, John. Thanks for having me.
Go on. Bye-bye. Bye for now.